Hello guys, hello friends, hello G's, it's your boy again, Falling with a Star. So guys, in our previous video we looked at introduction of connective tissue. We talked about components of the connective tissue and we looked at them in detail. So now I want us to look at classification of what? Connective tissue. When you take the connective tissue, it is being divided into three main types. We have the connective tissue proper, the supporting connective tissue, and the fluid connective tissue. So the connective tissue proper, the supporting connective tissue, and the fluid connective tissue comes together to form what? The classification of what? The connective tissue. When you take the connective tissue proper, guys, it is further being divided into two. We have the dense connective tissue and the loose connective tissue. We take them one by one, don't worry. When you look at the supporting connective tissue, it is further being divided into two. We have the bone and also what? The cartilage. So the bone and the cartilage forms what? The supporting connective tissue. We also have the fluid connective tissue, which is further being divided into two. We have the blood and the lymph. So the blood and the lymph forms what? The fluid connective tissue. But today our main focus will be on what? Connective tissue proper. So let's look at connective tissue proper. When you take connective tissue proper, we have the loose connective tissue and the dense connective tissue. So let's look at the loose connective tissue. When you look at the loose connective tissue, as we talked about, that we have three main components of what? The connective tissue. We have the cells, the ground substances, and we have what? The fibers. You understand? But when you take the loose connective tissue, the reason why we are calling it loose is that it has few fibers. And it has abundant cells and abundant ground substance. So let's say that this represents what? Loose connective tissue. You see that we have few fibers, only few fibers, and we have abundant cells. So all these represent cells, and the spaces between what? The space between the fibers and the cells represent what? The ground substance. So we have abundant ground substance. So anytime you see a connective tissue with few fibers, abundant cells, and what? Abundant ground substance, definitely it is what? A loose connective tissue. The loose connective tissue is being divided into three, we have the areolar tissue, the adipose tissue, and the reticular tissue. Areolar tissue, adipose tissue, and the reticular tissue. Let's look at them one by one. The areolar tissue is the most abundant of them all. It can be found in most organs. When you take your epithelia, beneath the epithelia, you can find what? The areolar connective tissue there. And now the question is, what is the function of this areolar connective tissue? This areolar tissue actually contains macrophages, and we all know that the function of macrophages is that they phagocytize what? Bacteria or pathogens or foreign substances in the body. In other words, they help protect the body. You understand? And this areolar connective tissue, they also cushion organs. They also help in inflammatory response because they contain mast cells. And we said that mast cells, they secrete something we call histamine. And histamine helps in what? Inflammatory response. So this contributes to what? The functions of what? The areolar tissue. Now let's move to the adipose tissue. The adipose tissue actually contains adipocytes that store fats. And the adipose tissue, we have two main types. We have the yellow or white adipose tissue, and we have the brown adipose tissue. For the yellow or white adipose tissue, the function of this yellow adipose tissue is that they produce hormone. Hormones like leptin. Let me write it here. Leptin. Hormone like resistin. Hormones like adiponectin. So these are some of the hormones produced by what? This yellow adipose tissue. You see, for the yellow adipose tissue in infants or at birth, it is white, but as you grow, they become yellow. And this yellow adipose tissue, they are being found in what? Adults. We have the brown adipose tissue, and the function of this brown adipose tissue is that they generate heat. And when they generate heat, they help maintain what? The body temperature. Temperature. Let's look at the reticular tissue. as we said, the brown adipose tissue, they help what generate heat, which help what maintain what the body temperature. Let's look at what the reticular tissue. The reticular tissue actually is mainly being composed by reticular fibers and cells. So when you look at the reticular tissue, you can find many what reticular fibers and cells. And as we said, reticular fibers, they can be found in the liver and also the lymphoid organs. So definitely the reticular tissue, they can be found in the what, in the liver, the spleen, and the lymph nodes. But the question is, what is the function of this reticular tissue? This reticular tissue, they actually help bind what smooth muscle cells. They bind what smooth muscle cells. Another function is that they remove worn out blood cells in what, in spleen. They remove worn out blood cells in what, spleen, in spleen. Worn out blood cells in spleen, and also macrophages in lymph nodes. Macrophages in what, lymph what, nodes. So these are some of the functions of what, reticular tissue. So let's move to the dense connective tissue. The dense connective tissue, they have abundant fibers. That's why we call them dense. They have abundant fibers, and they have few cells and ground substances. Few cells and ground substances. So let's say that this represents dense connective tissue. They have abundant fibers, few cells, and few what, ground substance. And this dense connective tissue is being divided into three. It is also further being divided into three. The first one is what, dense regular connective tissue. Why are we calling this dense connective tissue regular? It's because the fibers are being arranged in a parallel manner. They are being arranged in what, in a parallel manner. So these are the fibers, and they are parallel to each other. So because they are all facing one direction, it helps this connective tissue to withstand force in only one direction. In only one direction. And they can be found in ligaments, in tendons. Ligaments, tendons, aponeurosis. You understand? Yeah. So let's move to the next dense connective tissue, which is what, dense irregular connective tissue. For the dense irregular connective tissue, the fibers are arranged randomly, and because the fibers are facing many directions, they help withstand force in many directions. So they can be found in the dermis of the skin. You see, your skin can withstand forces in many directions, so they can be found in the dermis of the skin. They can be found in periosteum. You see, there is this dense irregular connective tissue that actually surrounds the bone. You understand? When you look at the surface of the bone, they are being surrounded by this periosteum, and this periosteum is a dense irregular what, connective tissue. The joint capsule. When you take the fibrous capsule, the joint capsule, we have two layers. The outer layer is called the fibrous capsule. The fibrous capsule is a dense irregular connective tissue. You understand? And we have the elastic connective tissue. Elastic connective tissue. For the elastic connective tissue, they contain more of what, elastic fibers, and they allow recurl after what, stretching. They allow what, recurl after what, stretching. You understand? So they can be found in structures like when you take your ear. You understand? Your ear. Yeah. So that's all for what, connective tissue. Thanks, guys.